The UFC reportedly asked its reigning heavyweight champion to step aside, and his response may have changed the entire direction of the division. According to former fighter and analyst Josh Thomson, the organization approached Tom Aspinall about temporarily vacating the heavyweight title while he recovers from an eye injury. Aspinall's reported reply: he would consider vacating if the UFC releases him from his contract. That single condition is what makes this situation far more complex than a routine injury update, because if that door opens, it could lead somewhere completely different. The moment that changed everything. To understand why this matters, we have to go back to UFC 321. Aspinall faced Cyril Gane in what was expected to be a defining heavyweight matchup. Instead, the fight ended in the first round after an accidental eye poke from Gane left Aspinall unable to continue. The bout was ruled a no contest. No dramatic finish, no clear winner, no resolution. And now, months later, the division is still feeling the ripple effects. According to publicly available reporting and commentary from Thompson's podcast, the UFC wanted to keep the division moving while Aspinall recovered. From a business perspective, that's understandable. Heavyweight is one of the promotion's most marketable divisions. But Aspinall's reported counteroffer changes the tone of the conversation. He didn't simply say no. He reportedly said he'd vacate if he's released. That's not just a medical delay, that's leverage. Why would the UFC ask a champion to vacate? Here's where it gets interesting. When a champion is injured, organizations typically have a few options. Create an interim title. Wait for recovery. Ask the champion to vacate. The UFC has used all three in the past. The heavyweight division has historically been unpredictable. Long layoffs, contract disputes, and unexpected outcomes have shaped its timeline before. Stability at the top is valuable, but momentum is equally important. So the UFC reportedly wanting activity makes sense. But what happens when the champion pushes back, publicly or indirectly? That's where this shifts from a scheduling issue to a negotiation dynamic. The contract angle. According to Thomson, Aspinall's willingness to vacate only if released would potentially allow him to pursue boxing opportunities. And that's a completely different landscape. Crossovers between MMA and boxing have become more common over the last decade. Fighters have explored options outside their original promotions when contract situations align. Aspinall has not publicly confirmed any move toward boxing, and there is no official announcement suggesting that he is leaving the UFC. But the possibility alone introduces uncertainty. If the UFC insists on vacating the title without releasing him, negotiations could become complicated. If they release him, they risk losing a heavyweight champion, entering his prime. Either way, the balance of power matters. The heavyweight division's bigger picture. Josh Thomson reportedly described the division as a mess right now. Strong words, but they reflect broader uncertainty. Let's break it down calmly. The championship bout ended in a no contest. The champion is recovering. No rematch has been officially announced. The promotion wants activity. The champion may want leverage. That's not chaos, but it is instability. Heavyweight divisions historically rely on clarity. Fans gravitate toward definitive champions, not extended negotiations. Aspinall's professional record stands at 15 wins, 3 losses, and 1 no contest. He built momentum quickly before the Gane fight. The no contest didn't damage his record significantly, but it paused his trajectory. And momentum in combat sports is everything. What does Aspinall gain by standing firm? This is where strategy comes into play. If Aspinall simply vacates without conditions, he temporarily loses status and negotiating power. If he refuses outright, the division remains stalled. But by reportedly tying vacating to release, he places a new variable on the table. It's not confrontation, it's positioning. In contract negotiation, leverage often comes from optionality. The more realistic alternatives a fighter has, the stronger their bargaining position. If boxing is a viable path, even hypothetically, that creates options, and options change conversations. The business side of heavyweight champions often anchor major pay-per-view cards. They are marketed as headline attractions. From the UFC's perspective, inactivity at the top can impact event planning and revenue timing. From a fighter's perspective, health and long-term earning potential matter just as much. An eye injury, even one expected to heal fully, is not something to rush. So the timeline becomes critical. How long is recovery expected? Is a rematch with Gane likely? Would an interim title dilute the championship? Would a contract standoff affect matchmaking? These are strategic questions, not emotional ones. The Gane factor. Let's not overlook Cyril Gane in this situation. The no contest leaves unfinished business. From a competitive standpoint, a rematch would bring clarity. From a promotional standpoint, it would resolve narrative tension. But if Aspinall is negotiating contractual terms, scheduling that rematch may not be straightforward. And if the UFC decides to move forward without him temporarily, Gane could be positioned for another high-profile opportunity. That adds another layer. Is this a power shift? This is the deeper question. For years, the UFC has maintained strict contractual control over championship timelines. Fighters rarely dictate release terms while holding belts. If Aspinall's reported stance holds, it suggests growing confidence among elite fighters to negotiate publicly or indirectly. We've seen increased fighter mobility across combat sports in recent years. The difference here, it's happening at the championship level. That's significant. What happens next? There are several realistic paths. The UFC waits for Aspinall to recover and schedules a rematch. An interim title is created. Aspinall vacates without release. Negotiations escalate privately, but remain unresolved publicly. Each outcome reshapes the division differently. And until an official statement is released by the UFC or Aspinall himself, all analysis remains based on reported commentary. Transparency will determine the narrative. The quiet stakes. This isn't just about one belt. It's about contract leverage, cross-sport opportunities, promotional control, division stability. And at heavyweight, small shifts can create major ripple effects. If Aspinall stays, the UFC retains a young, dynamic champion. If he leaves, the division resets overnight. Neither outcome is minor. Final perspective. Strip away the speculation, and this comes down to timing and leverage. A champion recovering from injury, an organization wanting activity, a negotiation potentially bigger than a single fight. The heavyweight division isn't collapsing, but it is at a crossroads, and crossroads often define eras. If the UFC and Aspinall reach alignment, this becomes a brief pause in an otherwise strong title reign. If not, it could mark one of the most interesting contract moments in modern MMA. The real question now isn't just who fights next, it's who controls the future of the heavyweight division. In the next breakdown, we'll examine how interim titles historically impacted championship legacies, and whether creating one here would strengthen or weaken the division long term. Because sometimes the belt isn't the biggest story. The negotiation behind it is.